All right, so let's break some of this down right now. Joining me is trial attorney David Ring. David, where do you stand on the reasonableness of this case? The idea that it was reasonable for her to go into the wrong apartment. We're learning more about how she actually got into the door, and was it slightly ajar? Did she see that it might have turned red, but she went in anyway? So where do you stand on it?
Well, good morning, Jesse. Hey, look, we've all done this, haven't we? You've walked up to a car that you thought was yours, and you pulled on the handle, and then you realize, wait, that's not my car. I parked 4 spots away. Or I walked over to an office door that I thought was mine. Look, we all have absent-minded moments, but this was the ultimate absent-minded moment, and she's going to pay for it. But is this really murder? I think it's totally reasonable, and all the evidence seems to support that she truly thought she was at her apartment and the door happened to open up for her. But I think the key to this case, Jesse, is going to be those seconds afterwards. Did she just pull out her gun and fire because she saw a person or a shape? Or did she hesitate and try to make sure she knew what was going on first? That's what this trial comes down to.
David, I couldn't have said it better. I'm glad you mentioned that. All this discussion, even if we assume, even if that was her apartment and he was an intruder. The question is, were her actions reasonable? Was it a case of self-defense? You talk about murder intentionally and knowingly here, right? She knew by firing that weapon what that weapon would do, what the consequences of that was. As we said earlier, it's not as if she just fired into the air and, oh my goodness, a bullet hit somebody. She knew that action. So I think that this part of the case is important, yes, absolutely. But really what it centers on, what happened in the apartment. If he wasn't advancing towards her, and if he wasn't this kind of threat, that's the problem here. That's the problem that I see for a self-defense argument, because she knew what she was doing. That's not the question. I think it falls under the murder statute. It's just a case of affirmative defense. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree. I mean, we can have all this testimony about what floor she was on or how the apartment looked. And I think this red carpet is while interesting, I don't think it's really that important. Why? Because who's paying attention? She's how many times have you walked past you have a picture hanging in your house. Can you tell me exactly what that is hanging in your house? You know what I mean? And so a lot of times we're simply not paying attention. Now, here's another key, and this isn't part of any legal statute or anything like that, but is this defendant going to appear to be sympathetic? Because let's assume this. Let's assume that she's having some romantic conversation with her partner. And is the jury going to look kindly upon that and say, you know what, she's having that conversation, and gee, and she killed a man because she was so wrapped up in this romantic conversation? Or was she having a conversation about something really serious that had happened at her job, something that involved her police work? Maybe makes her a little bit more sympathetic. I agree with you. It comes down to those seconds when she walks into that room and how she reacts.
Now, just to answer your question about the red mat, I'm going to disagree with you. I say it's very important because I may not notice things that are already in my apartment or things that are outside of my apartment, but I wonder if people would notice things that are slightly different. And here you have a bright red mat below your feet when you have to look down to put your key in. That's something that I think the prosecution is going to stress upon. They might have just taken a short break, but it's okay. I'm joined by a very special guest, David Ring, who's breaking this down. Now, David, you had mentioned something earlier about her being sympathetic. That seems to indicate that she's going to be taking the stand, and by all accounts, she will be taking the stand. You got to take the stand in a self-defense case. What is the best case scenario for her to testify to? What is the kind of testimony, if you're a defense attorney, you said you just nailed it, you might have changed this jury? What would you look out for?
Well, she's got to come in and look, she's got to present the story and not have contradictions in her testimony. She has that 911 call that she said a lot of things on that. And she's already, the jury's kind of already skeptical of her because on that 911 call, she's a little bit concerned about her own well-being as opposed to the person she just shot.
Well, David, I don't even want. I want to go right to that right now. You led me up perfectly to it. Do you want to hear the 911 phone call? Because that's what I want to hear, and then we're going to break it down on the other side. David, what we don't hear is what the prosecution emphasized in their opening statement. Does he seem like a threat to her? Did he come at her with a weapon? Was he trying to kill her? I didn't hear that. Did you get any sense of how this could be self-defense?
Like these statements she makes, this is incredibly important evidence, this 911 call. And you're absolutely right. There is nothing on that call where she says, oh my God, he jumped up at me. Oh my God, this man came towards me and I reacted. However, what is interesting, and she says at some point in there, I am so tired. I'm so tired. And we all know she worked a long shift. She had a long week and she was not paying attention. And it all comes down to, does that jury think she made a criminally reasonable mistake, or did she commit murder?
Was she not paying attention? This is the question, and we're gonna play a little bit more of some testimony. But was she not paying attention because she was so exhausted? Well, the flip side of that was she wasn't too exhausted to drive home. She wasn't too exhausted to not have a 16-minute conversation with her partner and flirt with him and maybe try to see him that night. She wasn't too tired to go walk to an apartment, and she wasn't too tired to take out her gun and open fire. So that's the counter argument to that. In the meantime, let's just go back to Officer Michael Lee, who responded to the scene, and we'll hear more about what that was like. This is from yesterday. All right, David, that was not great for the defense right there, trying to have a law enforcement say that this is the proper way to deal in this situation. The counter argument is she's not entering into a situation she was aware of. It's not like there was a report of a burglary. They set up shop. They go behind. They take cover. She walks into what she thinks is her apartment, and then she's hit with that situation. But then again, she's law enforcement. She should be prepared for anything, right? I mean, what's the standard here for a person in her position?
Hey, look, she is a professional. She's trained. She's been on the force for several years, and she knows when to use her weapon and when not to use her weapon. And that's true even when she's off duty. And so she's in her uniform. She's walking up to this door. And here, again, here's what it comes down to. She opens that door, and she is surprised to find someone in there. And is that reasonable for her to just whip out her weapon and shoot, if that's what she did? Or did she actually have an exchange of words? Did she say, hey, police officer, don't move, and he came towards her? That's what this trial is going to come down to, in my opinion.
Well, what we know so far, or what we can surmise, is that, okay, she walks in. There might have been an exchange of words. We've heard that from witnesses. We might not know exactly what she said, but let's say she did give verbal commands. If he's in that area by the couch, now there's no blood that was found on the couch, so maybe if he does stand up, at that point, is he a threat to her safety? I mean, where are we with this? Because the shell casings were found, I think, by the kitchen. And if we look at the layout, still is that clear that he might have been advancing? Were they 12 to 15 feet away? Is that enough? Based upon what we're seeing, he wasn't standing in front of her. He didn't have a weapon. He wasn't trying to attack her. But at what point, and have you ever seen a case where you can have self-defense if you have an unarmed person, but they appear to advance, they may be advancing, they may be a threat? I mean, does she have room here for a self-defense argument?
She absolutely has room for a self-defense argument, because what's going to happen is the jury is going to have to put themselves into her mind at that moment. And look, you can break this trial and these actions down, second by second, but go back to that night. She thinks she's at her apartment door. She opens the door. This happens in a matter of seconds, and she reacts. And this jury is going to have to decide, was that reaction reasonable and justified? It's still criminal. She shot and killed a man in his house. But was it reasonable and justified given her mindset at that moment in time? And that's what's going to ultimately decide if she's going to prison for many, many, many years or 5 to 7 years.
All right. Well, we have more to talk about, more to break down. And when we come back, we'll cover it all. Stay tuned.